Hello hunters, welcome back to the channel. My name is Peppo and today I want to share with you my results on testing the input lag in Monster Hunter Wilds. There's always a certain lag between when you press a button on your controller, mouse or keyboard and when the action appears on screen. This is known as input delay or latency, and the lower it is, the more responsive a game feels. I tested this input latency using my PS5 controller with a longsword in Monster Hunter Wilds, and the results were quite surprising. First off, I logged the FPS at 60 in the training area since it's one of the most stable environments in the game. Regarding the graphic settings, I disabled frame generation and I was playing with the LSS set on quality. I checked the latency of my controller when it was plugged into my PC. It showed 0 milliseconds, though in reality it's around 0.125 milliseconds. I also used a controller overlaid on OBS to see exactly on which frame the input appears on screen. I ran similar tests with my mouse and keyboard and the results were identical. Therefore, I will only share the results for the controller. I tested several different actions, not just attacks but also camera movements and focus mode, and these are the surprising findings. Certain actions start as soon as the input is registered on the screen, at what I call frame 0. In other words, the action begins immediately with no delay after the input is detected. This is the ideal scenario. For example, when you move the camera with the right analog stick, the movement starts on frame 0. This proves that the game can react to an input as soon as it registers it. Other movements don't start immediately after the input is registered. Instead, there is a delay between the input registration and when the corresponding action happens. I don't have a definitive answer as to why this delay exists, but let's look at some examples. With the overhead slash, when you press triangle on your controller, the game registers the input, but the action doesn't start until after 1, 2, 3, 4 frames. Rarely 3 frames, on average 4. For the slash, when you press R2, the game registers the input, but the action begins after 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 frames, rarely 6 frames, on average 7. I repeated the test multiple times and found that the input delays were very consistent for each specific action. The overhead slash typically averages 4 frames, while the slash averages 7 frames. So why is there a different input delay depending on the action? If the game can react immediately to the camera movement, then why can't it do the same for the other actions? I initially wondered if the button itself might be causing the delay, so I experimented by performing different actions using the same button. I tested Spirit Blade first twice, once with my weapon sheathed and one with it unsheathed. The same attack is triggered by R2, yet the results were startling. With the weapon unsheathed, there is a delay of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 frames, or rarely 7 frames, between input registration and action start. With the weapon sheathed, the delay drops to 0 frames, or occasionally 1 frame. I repeated these tests several times and the results remained consistent. It was hard to believe that the same button could trigger the same attack with 2 completely different input delays based solely on whether the weapon is sheathed or not. This clearly indicates an issue with the input delay in the game. Another interesting comparison involves performing Spirit Blade 2nd, 3rd and round slash normally versus executing them during a spirit charge. In the normal scenario, pressing R2 to perform this action takes about 6 or 7 frames for the character to react after the input is registered. However, if you hold R2 to initiate the spirit charge and then release it, the character reacts immediately and performs the same attacks that otherwise would have taken up to 7 frames to start. This discrepancy is puzzling. I also checked whether pressing and holding the same button made any difference, but it didn't. The input delay remained the same. To summarize my findings with the longsword attacks, here is what I found out. There are actions with very fast reactions, between 0 and 2 frames. Examples are the camera movement with the right analog stick, Spirit Blade first with the weapon sheathed via R2, Spirit Blade attacks after a spirit charge releasing R2, and the activation of focus mode via L2. Actions with around 3 frames of delay like Y slash, triangle after special sheath, and Spirit Thrust, R2 plus triangle. Moves with moderate delay, around 4 frames, overhead slash, triangle, thrust, circle, crimson slash attacks, triangle, and force slash, R2 plus circle. And finally actions with significant delay, up to 7 frames. Spirit Blade attacks, R2, special sheath, R2 plus X, and Y Spirit Slash, R2. Keep in mind that these results were obtained while playing at a stable 60 FPS. Every time I measured these specific actions, the delay was always consistent. For some of you, a delay of 1, 2, 3, or even 10 frames might not seem significant. However, it's important to consider that the delay measured here is only part of the overall system latency. There's always a delay from the moment you press a button to when the game engine or display screen generates the frame of the action that corresponds. This latency depends heavily on your hardware and cannot be zero. For example, a good system latency is generally under 50 milliseconds. This latency depends a lot on the hardware that you're using. Every system like a PC or a console have it. Based on my testing, I measure the latency from when an input is registered to when its corresponding action appears on screen. And this latency is much lower than the overall system latency. For instance, this delay can be effectively zero if the action starts on frame 0, as seen with the camera movement or Spirit Blade first when the weapon is sheathed. However, it can reach up to 7 frames for the Y Spirit Slash. This additional delay adds on top of the inherent system latency that every peripheral device experiences when communicating with a PC or console. At 60 FPS, each frame is roughly 16 milliseconds, so 7 frames add up to about 116 milliseconds, a significant difference. This extra delay is especially problematic for moves that require perfect timing, like the Y Spirit Slash. When you combine this with the inherent system latency, the total delay easily exceeds 150 milliseconds, which most gamers will notice and that can really hurt the gameplay experience. So my question is, if the game is capable of reacting immediately when the input is registered, why do we have different input delays depending on the action performed? Why are some actions nearly instantaneous, while others take noticeably longer, making them feel sluggish? I hope this video sheds some lights on the input lag issues in Monster Hunter Wilds, and that the developers will look into this to find a solution. And that's all for today. If you found this video informative, please consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching, take care, and see you in the next video. Have a great rest of your day. Bye!